Hello and welcome to this session about scaling digital, green and impact solutions in Copenhagen, Denmark area. We would have some talks about that as well. With me I have a wonderful panel. I would actually let you introduce yourself because you're going to do a better job than I will do. And we have 3 or 4 or 5 minutes each to present who you are, where you work, what you work with, and if you have some core visions or messages, and then we take it from there. This is a really important issue for us because we work with technology, and the digital technologies have a great potential in solving the crisis, so we think, right? So let's have a talk about that one. Sophie, can we start with you?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
So hello, I'm Sophie Bech. I work in DTU Skylab, and I have had the pleasure of working with our international programs. I am running a huge Horizon 2020 program called Scale Up Champions in Startup Europe. And the program basically is to connect the different ecosystems in Europe. So I have startups coming to Denmark. I'm sending startups to Spain or Estonia, other countries. We have an investment readiness program, so we can help the startups get ready to their scaling. And we also have discovery tours in the other countries and corporate startup program. So yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah,
it is.
You do it all alone?
I haven't been involved since like only 1.5 years.
All right.
And previous, I was in a deep tech startup, so I also come from, let's say, the perspective of the startup, and now I have to figure out how to help them scale as well. So that's pretty exciting. And we have had a lot of, let's say, startup difficulties or how to work together because we have, of course, multiple cultures represented in the project as well. So, for instance, working with Spain on the corporate program, it's so different how their corporates react to working with startups compared to what we do in Denmark. In Denmark, the startups, they know exactly how to pitch themselves. They are used to being really like nursed in the whole process of approaching because our ecosystem is well functioning, so they have a lot of offers all the time. But in Spain, the corporates are like, yeah, sure, we can work on that. You can come by. In Denmark, like working with, for instance, Danfoss, they are like, they want to know exactly what the process will be like. How many check-ins do we have? How many startups? What stage are they at? Even before they say yes. And I can't say that because I don't know what I'm going to recruit yet. I just know that we work with green tech solutions. So that's it's really, really interesting to work like that, where we're kind of building the programs as we run them, as we recruit. So it's very like dynamic, and we learn and fail all the time, but it's super, super fun, and it's very also, it has to be very transparent, right? Yeah, so yeah, I just want to mention, because I think that's one of the interesting things in this whole and what we're going to talk about after. We started up by making a mapping of the ecosystem. And I know you've heard like, okay, everybody does the mapping, but this was only the specific countries. It was only for deep tech solutions.
All right.
So if I have to map Denmark, I need to know where can international startups enter, how can they get funding from Denmark, which startup should they connect to be, you know, implemented well into the Danish ecosystem, and so on. So I have talked to about 100 people from the 5 countries, like getting the deep dive into their culture, into their innovation, like where are their strengths, and talking to professors, investors, other startups, like experienced startups, what worked, what didn't work, and so on. And it's just been like an amazing journey because it's all about the connection, it's all about the network. So if I can call startup Estonia, I know she will help me to introduce some of my startups to the right people in the ecosystem. So that's something I would love to touch upon later again and maybe discuss a little bit more. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm a huge fan of the Skylab. Get back to that one, yeah.
Yeah, and basically no one have seen the new Skylab because we've built, we got a lot of funding from Maersk, and we built the whole new 5,000 square meter scene. And the release party was just shut down with Corona, so we're just welcoming all now to come to see Skylab. And
when Skylab started, I was CEO at Venture Cup.
Yeah, right.
And Mikkel, he invited me on a
Mikkel
tour.
Sørensen, head of DTU Skylab.
Head of DTU, and it was just 2 rooms, and and what has just been the journey that you have been through as an organization.
Yeah,
it's been amazing.
8 crazy years.
It's a good example of how the whole scene of technology has been developed. To you.
Yeah, my name is Mathias. I come from Rockstar, specifically one of our funds called AgriFood. So it's actually a Dutch venture fund, but we are based out of Copenhagen, running the fund out of here. So I'm the investment manager, so I run really all of the investments we do in the fund. It is an accelerator VC, which means that when we do the initial investment in a company, they also join our accelerator program, are there for half a year, so we can help them get scale ready. Then afterwards, we can follow on and reinvest in the best of those companies. We can invest for the next 10 years or so we see ourselves as relatively long-term investors compared to other VCs at least. We invest exclusively in tech companies within food tech and agri-tech. So yeah, across the entire sort of food supply chain system. We are focused on Dutch and Danish companies, but we have a global mandate. So I'd say roughly half of our portfolio is from outside Europe.
Right.
So that's really what we do.
And where is the accelerator placed?
Right now, it's all online.
Of course it is.
Yeah, it's online.
Yeah, how could I ask that question? Yeah, of course.
We hope that we can do sort of a hybrid going forward. So some of the, we call it deep dive weeks, where we gather all of the companies and work together on some content pieces. We can hope some of it will be in Copenhagen, some will be in Amsterdam. That's how it used to be before COVID hit.
All right, awesome. By the way, if you're hearing some cheering, it's not because of us. There is a football tournament going on the other side. It's because of you, of course. But we have a bunch of. It's a really cool setup there. There are a bunch of cool people from different organizations working with social sector, homeless people, and then so on. And they have a final tournament going on the side. So if they score, we just cheer with them. All right? I hope it's not going to disturb you or the audience. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Zenia.
Yes.
The one
I was
and only.
wondering, so we have a lot of green tech startups who's actually in fundraising mode here today. So maybe if you could just add your ticket size, because then they kind of know whether they should come and approach you afterwards or not.
We always have the first ticket we invest in is always 100,000 euros.
Okay.
And then we can co-invest in any really ticket size up to 2 million euros roughly. That's the maximum we can do in the fund. And we started the pre-seed seed stage roughly and co-invest up until Series B. So we call sort of that transition period for the valley of death. That's where most of the startups really fail due to lack of funding, lack of corporate contacts or networks really, or the founding team split up, who knows. And we really want to help them out with that exact period through pre-seed to B. You can get tons of funding at the pre-seed stage from public funding, so subsidized loans from Vækstfonden, grants, what have you, but actual investor money at that stage is pretty difficult, especially also for the seed and A round.
Exactly. I mean, it's below 10% actually of all the startups back home that actually make it from seed to Series A. So it's a serious issue.
That's exactly the statistics we're trying to solve. Thanks for bringing it up. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, I'm Zenia. I'm part of a new marketing consortia. So a venture fund like Mathias is Rockstar, but actually almost any venture fund today, they obviously have the investment manager, who's the one that's doing the actual deals and scouting and talking to you guys. But then they typically also are starting to build up a team, a platform team. And that's really how I see Digital Hub Denmark. We are not the platform team of one specific venture fund. We're the platform team of any Danish digital startup who's in fundraising mode and who needs to internationalize. We are a political and private organization, and we have two, in this context, focus areas. We help with attracting international talent to your companies, and then we also help attracting international capital. We've also done some mapping, because that is the way forward.
What you do.
Be aware of what you are doing. Make sure that you've spoken to the existing players. Yesterday we had a panel discussion about why is it that we keep stepping on each other's toes and organizing the same kind of events in the same month without communicating. So we tried to avoid that classic mistake. And we went out and we spoke to all the different kind of activity players when it comes to investments in Denmark, and saying, okay, we know what you're doing today. First of all, maybe it's on your website. Second of all, I, by experience, because I've connected investors and startups for the past 15 years, know what is it that you typically do every year. What are the typical initiatives that you tried out? But even more importantly, we've spoken and asked, where do you want to go with your organization? What is your respective visions? And then based upon that, we're saying, okay, anything pre-seed and early stage, there's plenty of initiatives, actually 200 plus services in Denmark for Danish startups alone. So there's plenty of people who would like to do something for you guys. People sometimes do it of varying quality, so be aware of where you spend your time and resources. So we want to boost the existing initiatives that's doing really well. And then we also want to help, but a bit more narrow than you guys, between the going from seed to Series A. And we do that in collaboration with our owners. And we have 3 ministries, and then we have 3 private partners. So for example, Invest in Denmark, who's kind of like has the official mandate of attracting international capital. We're advising them on their national strategy, and their focus is actually from Series B and up. And we're trying to convince them to step down and include Series A as well. Cool.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So with us we have, just 1 minute. We have a university, we have an investment fund, and we have a private, public government organization working on this. On you.
And then I've been part of the Nordic and Danish tech scene for the past 15 years. So I'm also on the board of co-working spaces, startup hubs, whatever you're going to call them, Matrikel 1, Founders House, and then we have a new association specifically for Danish tech startups, and I'm also very involved in that, where we're trying to say what are the general challenges, and can we do something and change it in the political frameworks? For example, could we have startups and entrepreneurs in every single committee who needs to come with the recommendations to our politicians, for example?
No, that was absolutely fantastic introduction to the next point, which is what are the challenges and the opportunities for our community, tech community in our region? You mentioned, let's talk with you.
I can go first. For us, we are very much dependent on the funding programs to be able to run what we have, like services and programs in Skylab. And every time, like my project, for instance, is 2.5 years. Now we're 1.5 years into it, and we have run several of the programs multiple times. And we all have, the ideal would be to implement it so that it will be a permanent solution in Skylab. But who will pay for that?
Yeah.
So when we are done with the Scale Up Champions project, we have to apply for a new project, which means new people, new startups, new program names that people don't know. Like going into, just us as an example, going into the DTU Skylab webpage, you have no idea what is the OIX. Yes. That's a name, but it doesn't say anything. So it's super complicated to figure out. And every time we do a mapping, it's like, okay, 6 months later, it looks totally different. Yes. So you can't, it has to be dynamic all the time, and people will change all the time, and the networks will build up and delete themselves and build up. And, even though it's kind of the same people in the ecosystem going round, then it's super much a challenge. How can we make sure that something will stay the same. So the startups know what's going to happen, and they know who to approach, and they know, okay, this is crap, but this is great. Like, we can't say that because things are changing all the time.
Exactly.
So that's for us.
So how do we make sure that things can continue, right? Because there's a
At
lot
least
of
the great things, right?
200.
Some things will always be crap.
200. You mentioned, Zenia, you mentioned 200 programs.
Yes, services. Yeah, it's crazy.
It's really, we are a small nation. Are we more than 200 people in this country? Yes, we are. But almost, 200 for programs. How do you navigate through this? What do you think? You chose to come to Denmark.
Yeah, so
right?
I think we chose Denmark for a number of different reasons, right? So we have the headquarters in Amsterdam, and we think Holland as a whole is probably the most advanced sort of agri company in the world. Yeah. Then why Denmark, really? We're also one of the best countries in the world for raising animals, for example. We have a really large dairy sector. We have a fantastic food scene, Noma. We have a fantastic beer scene. I mean, considering we're such a small country, we're really on the map when it comes to being sort of at the forefront of food and agri-tech. So that's really why we came here. And then now we're here, we also see that the companies coming out of Denmark are of super high quality. I have this one example from DTU Skylab, actually, Simoscope, a company we invested in last year. They developed sort of a technical solution for monitoring fermentation processes in microbreweries. We have tons of microbreweries in Denmark, so it's an obvious place to start.
We still have their MVP in Skylab.
Yeah, one of the co-founders is actually Greek. He came to Denmark to study at DTU. I think just attracting foreign students, for example, is a great example why we're good. Then, of course, the beer segment is quite a small niche market, right? So through working with us, we also introduced them to other fermentation type companies. It could be dairy fermentation, it could be large-scale industrial fermentation, Novozymes, Hansen. I mean, we're the world's best at doing exactly that. So now we're taking a great idea, working with sort of a small niche in the food system, actually being now applicable to gigantic industry as a whole. And I think that's really what Denmark can offer. We have awesome sort of educational institutions. We have great sort of large corporates who can help the startups or collaborate with them and help them scale. And then, of course, we have tons of funding initiatives, Bech Fund and all of the programs you mentioned, us including providing private capital as well. I mean, I think there's a whole reason, or a whole host of reasons to be happy about being a startup in Denmark.
But are we, I completely agree with you, there are some advantages here, then we are really good, but the other places in the world, they have different advantages in different areas.
Yeah.
So if we really want to be within the green and impact field, pushing the green transition, then can we be happy that we are a very good place to attract the early stage, and because we are so digital ready in our country, and we have some advantages, and getting them to kind of start on something as a test bed. But when it comes to scaling them, we often see that they move to London, to US, to Germany.
But they come back.
I was about to say, yeah.
That's a good question.
All the startups I know who went to San Fran, they are coming back 1.5, 2 years later, and they discovered they were like so drained from the whole investment race, and they tend to figure out solutions here or collaborating with other European countries. Right. Germany, for instance, is a pretty exciting space to look at. So I think, sure, it's interesting, but we still have such a great system in Denmark with the funding and the public funding and the matchmaking with the Vækst Fund. Yeah. So it's still basically coming here is it's much more inclusive and we can talk about it's much more transparent. It's not the fluffy, we can do that. It's like, okay, so you want to do that? This is how we're going to do it.
But are we better than Swedes?
No.
No, because they can take the plane and often they fly over Copenhagen, as Nick used to say. They come and they fly over Copenhagen.
The Swedes are basically better at most things.
And then when they want to have fun, they come to Copenhagen and go have some drinks. What do you think?
I think the opposite. So I think recently, and I actually forgot the source, who did like a beautiful oversight of saying the 8-10 unicorns that we do have. The 10 unicorns that we do have, or that started at least in Denmark, 8 of them are no longer in Denmark, and they did not return. And those are the guys that we really want to keep, right? Or have returning at least. And then some of the unicorns that I've known of have, yes, returned, but they've returned after they exited to an international corporate one way or the other. They had their handcuffs for the 2-3 years, and then they're like, yes, we're going back. And luckily, they're starting the next business. And that is, of course, where our future success is going to lie. And I think a really nice trend is, of course, that these serial entrepreneurs are all looking for impact. They all want to start a new impact green tech startup, either themselves or they are joining some of the youngers and then adding their experience so that they at least will scale. So, I mean, we're on the right track, but at the same time, we're just so far behind. And there are so many more things, there are so many obstacles that, for example, we have how many strength positions? Why is it? So I've been here for 2 days now, right? And anyone out there who hasn't made it yet, we have a full week here, and I can only recommend it, right? We're not that many people, but it's great speakers. There's actually time to catch up with whomever's been on stage and who sits amongst the audience. The coffee is lovely and the sun is shining. And it's important discussions that's going on not only on stage, but just as often just over here in the corner. So I can only recommend you to come join us. But our system and ecosystem is complex. And you mentioned, what's their names?
Simoscope.
Exactly. Yep. So I know them as Bjørnalais.
They used to be called Bjørnalais.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the new guys.
The new guys.
But that's a foreign student who studied here. We've just seen an article saying, oh my God, we're spending so much student subsidiaries, what's it called? Student
student loan,
SU,
student salary.
On international students. But we don't have the data. We don't track that they actually go out and start their own companies. We can't, as a community, go back to the politicians at the parliament and say, but they do create value, and it is actually a good calculation. And I think that's really what we need to do, right? We need to work together across the different organizations, and we need to be able to work on some sort of basic data so that we can go back together, every single one of us, regardless if we're planning an event in the same week, and actually be able to show the aggregated or accumulated impact that the startups are doing. And I guess indirectly also our respective organizations.
Can I add something to that? I understand your pain. Because we have the same pain, which is the ones who are actually contributing and building the, strengthening the ecosystem. We are mostly dependent on public funding. We don't get the investors investing in us. They have their own scouting program, and that's fine. Maybe we should talk. But basically what we do is we run for funds, and funds are as you said, often they have some timelines to it. Right? So 2 or 3 years. And then because we need another fund, we figure out a new idea, which is taking what was working and then taking a new idea, rebrand it, and then apply for another fund. And if you're lucky, we can continue. So the arms that are there to help and carry and support and lift the job that we do before you get to them, nobody's paying for that beside the public sector. How do we kind of create? Is that the public sector responsibility to invest in those things, or should we actually look into this field and professionalize it?
Well, the problem is we can't really compare ourselves to, for instance, the States, because we have a totally different system. And if I invest myself as well as a business angel, and it's just not good business. No. But it's super exciting, and I learn a lot, and I can go close to the startups, so that's interesting. But it's not necessarily something that I throw all my money at because I know it will not necessarily come back, rarely come back. And I think that's the investment side of it. If they invest in a program or like building up the hubs or continuously having programs run, it's not necessarily good business for them. But we do see that some of the VC funds that build their own programs, and that I think is a great idea because they support from down up, and they can build out in other countries and send the startups around.
And we see that trend too.
Yeah.
And it might be that we have to close our doors and say thank you so much for this time. You guys take over.
Yeah.
But we see continually in this journey of raising the talents, because that's also one of the topics that you're talking about, is getting the talents. How do you work with this?
I mean, you're opening a deep tech fund, so I guess you're aware of the problem.
Yeah, with both deep tech, but also less tech, right, platforms and AI and stuff. But yeah, sure. I mean, it's more like a political question, right? How do you want to spend taxpayers' money? Personally, I think it's often quite a good investment to invest in talent education. I think the SU system comparison to US is awesome. But it is a political debate to some extent, right? How do we want to spend taxpayers' money? For us, of course, talent is the key. We invest in founders. At the pre-seed stage, there is no company. Sure, you have an idea, you have a logo and everything, and you may be generating a bit of revenue. But in reality, if the founders leave, you don't have a business.
So how do you do that? Is that through
attract
calls?
Or retain, or do you mean foster talent?
No, attract them. Where do you find them?
Well, I think some of our Danish sort of institutions, educational institutions, are really great at fostering those talents. I mean, they have their own incubator programs, for example. So the case I mentioned before, they go straight from DTU Skylab into our portfolio. I think that's an amazing journey. Right. Some are less fortunate. Some are just, maybe just come up with an idea. Maybe also not after their studies, but maybe after a long career in the corporate sector. They come up with a great idea and they do something else. There are many ways we can do it. Just as an example, we have just run what we call a selection days process. So that's where we open up for applications for companies to apply to our program, and we can invest in them. We received more than 600 applications from all 6 continents. The vast majority of quality startups, they come from Europe, Northern Europe. Maybe not always specifically Denmark, but Northern Europe in general. I mean, that speaks volumes to me. Yeah. We get tons of US applicants as well. They're much less sophisticated in terms of tech solutions. I think, of course, Silicon Valley, you can't deny that that's an amazing sort of idea and business generator. But when it comes to agtech and food tech, I think actually we do have quite a lot to offer. I'm not saying that all is rosy. We have tons of challenges. We can always do better. We can never be complacent. But I think we're off to a good start. Comparing us to Sweden, I don't know. I tend to think like Northern Europe, for example. We had a case with a company, founders being mostly Russian, located in Spain, Germany, some in Russia, some in the US, spread all over, formed a company, incorporated in Germany. We invested in them, they decided, well, we can only scale in the US. That's where the money are, that's where the valuations are higher, that's where the real market is. They're doing satellite data sort of management for quantifying greenhouse gases. So, carbon dioxide and methane, for example, for farmers to use. After fundraising for half a year in the US, they found out what really there is not an investor base to invest in that sort of deep tech technologies. They came back to Europe. We have now closed a round with them with an Irish investor and a German angel and some Danish investors. And they're relocating back to, not Denmark, unfortunately, but Ireland due to the low corporate tax rate.
Close enough.
Yeah. But they're coming, I mean, and you're talking about unicorns, right? That's often the most important parameter, is there a unicorn? I think, realistically speaking, also when talking to founders, most startups are not going to be unicorn. They're either going to die before that, or they're going to be bought out by a corporate.
But
that's just,
I would say it's not necessarily that all the startups need to be unicorns.
Exactly,
only
that's
5
my
million
point,
people
really.
in Denmark, so how many unicorns
you can
should
still
we create
be
or
a
could
great
we create?
startup adding tons of value without being a unicorn.
Exactly.
I would love us to have more unicorns. They're making the headlines, right? But I think that's not just always going to be the case, unfortunately.
No.
Realistically speaking.
I wonder, Human, because I think I started by presenting myself saying it's super important that we bring actual founders and entrepreneurs into the debates. And I'm seeing a couple of founders out there amongst
I'm not done yet.
audience.
Let me be the moderator.
Do we have time to include them?
We would have
At one
time.
point?
Let me do this job, and then you can take over when I'm done. I want to get back to you.
Yes.
Because I have this final questions that I want all of us to talk about. And that's something that you work on, very focused. In the past 10, 15 years, we've seen Silicon Valley as the place where everybody goes to. So we basically, we ship our entrepreneurs, make programs in which we support them to go over there and talk to some investors, and we have had Scale It and all of these different programs. When it comes to impact, are we seeing a different movement or not? What I heard yesterday was that there's going to be a flight full of investors from Silicon Valley flying to Copenhagen in November to come and see and talk to impact startups.
You don't mean Stockholm, you mean Copenhagen?
No, actually Copenhagen. Is that...
Not the capital of Sweden. But,
not the capital of Sweden. I don't know if they know it or not. But is impact going to be a game changer for our tech scene community?
In short, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think to some extent it's also driven by regulation, right? The EU is pretty on the forefront of regulation. The company I mentioned before, Carbon Space, it's sort of mapping emission data. All of their biggest clients will be in Europe because they're forced to understand and document their own emission data.
Yeah.
So that's a great starting place. So yeah, I think in short, yes.
Yeah.
Most of the startups we talk to, they have built in sustainability goals for their business plan, really. That's where they start. And then they build a business around it. Yeah.
When you are out there and trying to attract talent and investors, you must kind of have your selling points to them. And you know through the interaction why they choose to come.
I mean, Public Denmark has a massive, humongous focus upon green and climate. But if you speak to the international investors, they're not very impressed with the pipeline and what we are here to present them of green tech startups.
Right.
There's too few and they are too unambitious. So we have a challenge, right? I mean, we have a green investment fund is like 3.4 billion.
Yeah.
I mean, we're a small country and somehow we managed to set up a framework saying pipeline can only be Danish. I mean, I understand that, like, you know, taxpayers' money and probably they should do, but we have a challenge, right? That we're still caught up in this like national framework where the standard KPIs and I don't, very open for suggestions here. I don't necessarily how to change it, but if you're looking at how do we create wealth in Denmark, how do we create jobs in Denmark, and those are the main parameters for whatever public funding is coming in, that's a challenge because we're living in a global interconnected world, just like the headline of this panel was scaling tech and digital solutions in Greater Copenhagen. I mean, that in itself is a paradox, right? Why is it? And quite often I spend a large amount, and I love my friends and colleagues in Aarhus and Odense and Aalborg, but I spend a lot of time discussing why why are current activities not located in Jutland? But that's not the important point, right? The important point is that we go international and we benchmark. Like, why don't we talk about why are we not in Stockholm, or why are we not in London, or why are we not in Berlin? Like, why are we talking, excuse me, about Aarhus?
Sophie.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because I think a lot of the innovation we see right now, and like maybe the startups don't necessarily need to come from the universities, and that's how we invest and that's how we build up. It could also be corporate innovation, and they build smaller teams themselves and scale them instead. So it could also be a different perspective that we approach, because the corporates in Denmark are more transparent. They're very much on the green agenda right now. So I think there is an opportunity here we're not really talking about. So that could potentially also be a way, and they already have like the whole European or international perspective. So that's
definitely.
That's
I think
also,
Mask is running the growth program, right?
for instance,
which is
yeah, a
only
lot of
on food and
Yeah.
and mobility. Greater Copenhagen, right? I love Greater Copenhagen, and I also love Jutland. But should we, Copenhagen, Denmark has 6 million of people living in here. It's a relatively small market. You chose to come here, but at the same time, should we? The idea with the Greater Copenhagen is, of course, to give it more power, to gather 85, 86 municipalities, because it gives a little bit more power and options for investors to come and talk. But should we just be more Nordic? Is that, or should we just say, no, it doesn't really matter, it's just Denmark, it's Jutland and Copenhagen, and that's it?
Yes.
Yes. Okay,
Yes.
you go with a yes.
We should be more Nordic. I used to work for the US Embassy in the trade department and helping American companies entering the Nordic and then eventually European market. And we would never, ever talk about Denmark alone. We would always present ourselves on the international stage to the audience, to the specific client or customer as the Nordic market of 25 million people, who is the green landing pad, test bed, whatever you're going to call it, to the European market, which has X size, right? And then you got their attention. We would never talk about single individual Nordic countries, not even our colleagues in Sweden.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I would actually give the opportunity to the audience. If you have any questions you want to ask our panel, then our colleague is there. Please raise your hand if you have any questions. If not, then I can definitely take over. I have no problem.
But I'm curious, and I'm not afraid to pinpoint Martin.
Thanks.
How can we help you and your startup?
Like,
maybe this is a bit harsh, but we actually find that the investment companies or organizations that in this Danish scene, their demands and their requirements is absurd in combination of looking at investors from UK or US. So we actually find that the investment opportunities here, they are not attractive.
Sorry, who are you?
No, yeah, I'm the founder of What's Up Power. We are doing energy storage. So, yeah, and one of the main reasons why we have this boom in these kind of green companies is, I think that the fundamental thing is that we actually have defined, and that is of course through politicians and through organizations like you, Human, we have defined what value does impact have. And this is the value we actually go out and sell as startup companies in Denmark. And I think this is, and let's just talk about the Nordic countries, we have been able to define a value for both in agriculture, but in many CO2 emissions and NOx and whatever, and that is the value we have been able to define and go out and sell. But for the investment scene in now I would just say Denmark, the demands and the requirements, they're not attractive for small companies. Very simple.
all right.
I mean, this is also what I hear, and I wonder maybe, Andrea, because you're from Evolve and you're also in fundraising mode, right? Do you concur with Martin? Does the local investors compared to international investors, that's also what I hear, are very specific, want to see more traction, show me the data, show me the numbers, rather than the forecasts?
They are very specific. I would say that is part of why we
And
become
now,
so good.
before we had to ask Martin, what is it that you do? So maybe if you start by saying, what is it that you do?
Yes. So I'm from Evolved, and we produce methodology for the efficient use of electric vehicles and sustainable vehicles in parcel distribution. So we produce software, and then we implement that software to empower certain areas of the society. And I actually can echo pretty well what Mark has said, exactly because the demands are high. That is true. I kind of like that, because that also makes us better. but it is also a negotiation way for the investors that are local in here. And if you look at the numbers, it's pretty clear that the opportunities for investment in Denmark, they are actually smaller than in other countries, and particularly than in the US. So it is pretty clear that if you're raising funds in Denmark, you will most likely give more out of your company for less. It is just reality.
All right.
Can I pick that one?
That would be the last remark.
Yeah.
And you will get it. That's what you deserve.
It's tough to do short, right? Because there's a lot to be said about that. I mean, if I start from the investor perspective, right, it's a well-known fact that less than half of all venture funds actually generate any return at all for their investors. Less than 10% are actually making sort of 3x returns, which would be a minimum requirement for the investor base. So it's incredibly tough to make returns in a venture company like I'm representing. In the US, you're flooded with capital. So you're extending safe notes to startups left, right, and center. So for those who you don't know, that's basically an investment agreement. It's a one-pager. That's how light the documentation is. In comparison, my convertible note I would offer to a company is maybe 10 pages. Of course, it comes with more requirements. You want to be a long-term sustainable investor generating return for your investor base. We can't sort of just write out blank check. There needs to come with some sort of commitment from the founders. Absolutely. In Denmark and in also Netherlands, in many Europeans, there's tons of ways to combine private funding with non-dilutive funding. Bech Fund is a great example. Rockstar is an accredited investor at Bech Fund, and when we invest, they can triple our investments in some cases with non-dilutive funding. You see the same in the Netherlands and Italy. So if you are seeking advice from an actual investor in this space, you can definitely raise money with, of course, some requirements, but being diluted less or on par with a US company. So I think it's about understanding how can you structure around for yourself. It's absolutely doable. We have done it many times for Danish companies. It's just about figuring out how. And if you want advice on that, I can definitely help you also after this session. Yeah.
Awesome. Zenia,
Nice.
you get the last word.
I'll do it shortly. But there's two viewpoints, right? There's the startup, the company viewpoint, and the way that I sum it up is, well, go internationally, right? Skip the local investor scene. And this is also a trend that we're seeing. More and more of our local startups are actually skipping our local investors and then going straight to Boardmember, Project A, Springer, just to mention a few of the latest ones within the past 2 months. And they didn't have any Danish investments at all. And then, but as a country, I mean, this is it's so sad, right? I'm a nationalist. I'm very proud of Denmark and what we do. And we can't, this is like game over, right? So we do need to do something about this as a country. But as a startup, go and look internationally.
And with these words, I would like to thank you. I'm sorry I didn't give you the last chance to say anything, but we would invite you back to another topic later on. Thank you so much, and thank you, Zenia. And we are going straight to the next talk. Thanks.
Thanks for having us.